I want to thank all of you for all of your time, for all your research. I'm a resident, and so for me personally, it means a lot that you've been out on our beaches and showing that there's a great amount of research going on, so thank you. One of the problems we've had, I volunteered with Surfrider for 4,000 hours, and so we have been able to gather samples and send them off for analysis to high-tech forensic labs across the country. And so we have had a challenge in the fingerprint degrading. And I was wondering, are they going to be addressing this for the next disaster? And what can we do to make sure that a responsible party is still going to be present, cleaning up our beaches, because of this arrangement of using a specific chemical analysis to match the oil? Does that make sense?
Yep.
So worried, but, so you're doing a lot of chemistry, but how can we get that chemistry accepted at the federal level?
Okay, so let me
Repeat the question.
Okay, let me try and repeat the question. The question was, some of these oil is going away, so is there a way to have an acceptable way of fingerprinting and identifying these chemicals, especially if there is a future oil spill? How do we deal with it? Excellent question. In fact, I just had a couple of conversations with some folks at Alabama emergency agencies. Tomorrow something happens in Gulf of Mexico, especially in Alabama or Florida beaches. If I'm an oil company, I'm going to say, what do you think I'm going to say?
It's BP.
It's not mine, it's BP's. What are you going to do? ADM? What are you going to do, emergency agencies of Florida and Alabama? The answer is, I really don't know. I'm an academic, I can ask questions, okay? And those questions have to be raised. I know we have settled the lawsuit, so everything has settled down, so life is all great. Alabama has got, what, $200 million deficit in budget, and that's the time we settled. So it's a good way to kind of take the oil spill money and fill the budget gap, maybe. I don't know. If I'm a governor, probably I'll do that. May not be a great idea. I hopefully, our political system will be, it's a policy question you're asking, actually. And we are, as an academic, I'm completely worthless in answering the question, but I can tell my opinion as a voter, if you will, is I think groups like yours should put some pressure on the local politicians, because there has to be a policy decision made that we prepare for the next disaster. And Dr. Hayworth showed the picture, right? There are so many, it's just a matter of time. Something is going to happen. And how are you going to learn from this? And so one of the things we probably have to do is keeping track of the background. What is the background? It has changed completely. And we have no clue about it. And we have no way to fight a future battle on what was the background and how do you do that. Okay, so that's my answer, brief answer to a long answer to your policy question. Now, from a science point of view, fingerprinting is a very, very standardized scientific methodology. In fact, the oil spill fingerprinting is kind of we are babies, because the oil companies have invested tremendous amount of resources because they want to know from which reservoir the oil came from and how do they look chemically. So there's a tremendous amount of research. So what we do is they're all published, and we work with some of the top brains in this field. So in terms of techniques and everything, we are absolutely confident. These are all peer-reviewed publications. So as I told in my presentation, I'll be happy to challenge anyone, not within Alabama, nationally and internationally, the hypothesis we put out in a peer-reviewed publication, which is basically, in my opinion, all you need is a physical characterization of these tar balls, especially in Florida, Alabama region, and they all literally match some very unique fingerprints, and that is very well established. That science is very well established, and it's still evolving. There is quite a bit of advancing, and we'll continue to work on those things. That's from a scientific side, we will do that. I think what is important is the policy side. I think somebody should be monitoring them and continuously tracking some of these things so we have a better understanding. We can learn better from this incident.
Parker, I think, and Susan's asked me the same thing, I think what she's referring to is not the fingerprinting that you or the other labs are doing, is the fingerprinting that the federal government uses, usually Coast Guard labs, which if it gets, and I'm not a chemist, but if there's a slight amount of contamination, which is expected somewhere between, I think, 3 to 5 years, then the results will come back that it's, don't say
Inconclusive.
no match, but it's kind of referenced as not a match to BP anymore.
You might want to call on Charlie Henry, who's in the crowd. He was a NOAA chemist for a number of years working on fingerprinting. He's also familiar with the Coast Guard method, so he might be able to help answer.
Yeah, so I'll add Patricia to it. And just to follow up on.
Charlie, do you want to come up here? Just sorry.
Here, come sit on my lap.
Sorry. Here, speaking to this phone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Welcome to the bench.
Sorry, Charlie.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, no, I'm good. So it kind of follows up on the first question as well. And when you do fingerprinting for oil there's lots of different techniques. We've mainly talking about gas chromatograph mass spectroscopy analysis, which actually focuses on the semi-volatile hydrocarbons in oil. There's things that are heavier that can be good compounds. There's other compounds that you do with LCMS, like the metal porphyrins that are good fingerprint indexes. There's metal indexes. But we try to focus on a range of hydrocarbons that do degrade over time. The more recalcitrant ones are like the hopanes and steranes that you've seen presented here. That's true. But when you start off doing a fingerprint analysis, you may have 40 components that you're looking at to get that fingerprint for comparison. Over time, oil degrades, and you have fewer and fewer of those components left to have confidence that you have a match that's a fingerprint. The approach that I take, the Coil Lab takes, is that when you reach a certain point that the oil is degraded to a certain point, your confidence drops. The Coil Lab standard is it has to be legally defensible in a court case because they use it for the Oil Pollution Act, court criminal activities.
And
There's a
Charlie,
different
the
standard.
Coil Lab is the Coast Guard lab?
That's the Coast Guard Lab. That's
Okay.
the Central Oil Identification Lab. They have a different standard they have to hit than maybe an academic research environment. So you will get them saying, I reach a certain point, my ability to legally defend and have confidence that the chemistry data will support my argument is degraded. And that's why they, at a certain point, are going to be less confident to say 100%. I would never say 100% either.
And then,
I would say, I kind of enjoy your talk, so don't do that. But at the same time, is that you do reach a point that you're using fewer and fewer, and you can't switch it around and say, oh, 95% of it matches, so I have 95% confidence. It's got to be 100% when you're fingerprinting on what you have available.
at least what
So,
was told to me about,
yeah,
during the response,
yeah.
by the Coast Guard, Deputy Incident Commander at the time, because the question came up in Mississippi,
Mhm.
where they were, at least in 2011, they were able to tell us almost a date that they would not be able, gave us a range, and it was, I think, 3 to 5 or either 4 to 6 years, I can't remember.
For Hopane to go away?
And so-
No, and it really varies because it depends like where the oil is in the
Well,
environment.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you can't put it, there's
Yeah.
no magic date on it, We still fingerprint oil from Exxon Valdez up in
Yeah.
Petroleum
Yeah.
Sound that's 25 years
25
old
years
now.
old.
Yeah.
It's really the point of degradation of that oil where I lose my chemical signatures that my confidence is
Yeah.
degraded.
How-
That's the
how,
worst. Yeah.
much does contamination factor into, could that?
A lot.
You get like-
The more trace the samples are, the older they are, which they may have been in the environment and picked up residuals from potentially other sources, then you have a greater potential for basically contamination, which gives you changes in those ratios because they're similar hydrocarbons. I think one of the points you make is really good. Your guys in Alabama are kind of fortunate, and if there isn't a lot of other sources of oil on your beaches, so you can, with a lot of confidence, say if it looks like this, it's most likely BP. Well, you probably couldn't say that in West Louisiana.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely,
For
yeah.
example,
lots of
we've got
people
some
say
hot
that.
spots
Yeah.
where we can go out every time and can pick up, especially in the winter. By myself, I can get 18 pounds a day. each.
Yeah, I believe you.
Yeah.
And if we sample that oil, if I take some of the larger tar balls that you can tell are just coming off of a fresh mat, but some of the ones that are rolling, we can send both of those to the lab.
Mhm.
One of them will test positive, and the other one's like you're saying is down below that percentage level. There's concern when we get results back like that, if a response,
Yeah.
because especially after they're signed out, what Susan was talking about, we can't get a responsible party now to come back.
No, I understand, but I can tell you, that's where the COIL method is based on legally defensible import data. As the sample is degraded, their confidence is going to be reduced to a point that they'll say it's inconclusive.
What
That is what
method
they
is that?
have.
Who's they?
Who's that cool method?
They is the chemists that run the Central Oil Identification Lab for the coast. Now, we also have chemists in NOAA. I work for NOAA. One of our key chemists is Dr. Ed Overton. I don't know if you've ever
Sure,
met
oh,
him.
sure, yeah.
Everybody knows Dr. He's University
Yeah,
of Alabama graduate even. And I worked for Ed for 13 years in the old days, a long time ago. But Ed's one of our chemists that does. And sometimes we'll do it independently, but COIL Lab, the Coast Guard Lab, has a very straight way they do things because it's driven by that legal defense. Me in
is
the
it
academia
COIL?
world, when I was at LSU, I'd go, I know it's BP oil, but would it meet their standard? Maybe not. But we'd have confidence. You have a lot of confidence.
What lab is that? Coal lab, you said?
It's called Coast Guard Central. Where's my Coast Guard guy?
It's the MSL lab now.
All right, I'm sorry. They changed the name
What is it?
now.
What is it? MSL
Marine
Science?
Safety Lab. It used to be the Central
where are
Oil
they
Identification. Now it's the Marine
located?
Safety Lab.
Groton Connect.
Groton Connect.
Yeah.
And they use a GCMS technique. It's very similar. In fact, we worked with them back for they've evolved it over the years, but it uses almost the same type of approach you're using. It really comes down to they have a standard based on
Sure.
their on evidence in court.
Yeah.
Often in field on response, we have a different standard. We might squint.
Sure, yeah.
That's all.
Well,
How can you change that, though?
I mean, yeah, so,
Oh, no, you're not gonna be able to because they're right. Because you reach a point that based on the standard in court, it will not meet that standard.
But in Europe, they use the oil spill identification network, from the bond agreement, so why can't we?
Oh, that's for eyeball observations. That's not a GC, that's not an analytical technique.
Cocaines and stearings, like they're doing it all.
It's the same method. And I would bet if you talk to their researchers, and I'll tell you, I gotta get off the stage.
sure,
This is
yeah.
your show.
No, that's okay. No, I think you're pretty perfect, yeah.
But no, it's that, where it really comes down to, and I've been on the other side of this, let me flip it around. Had a spill off of Oregon, the New Caressa, and the state of Washington's going, there's oil all on our beaches. They had a few tar balls. We go up there, and I looked at their data they laid on the table, and about 85–95% of the peaks matched up. And they said, see, 95% confidence, this is oil from that spill. So this stuff don't match up. This is from something else. No, this matches up. When a sample is degraded to the point that you're losing, you're only down to 2 or 3 different indicators out of 40, your confidence is degraded. That's all there is to it. And that's just the nature of the business.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then you get off the
That's-
front
yeah.
stage, because it's your show.
It's a fair point.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think part of the discussion that hasn't been had that I think is important is, presence or absence of oil does not equate to harm. Presence or absence of particular chemical compounds does not directly equate to harm. So, it's all about exposure, what's the route of exposure, what's the concentration the organisms get exposed to. Also, what factors into is, this whole discussion is cleanup endpoints, right? So, there's a consequence for having heavy equipment on a beach, right? Digging up oil, digging up the entire beach. So, those cleanup endpoints were talked about between all of the agencies, the trustees, the responsible party, Coast Guard, and they were agreed upon for lots of various reasons, right? You can't occupy a beach with heavy equipment that, the shorebirds are nesting. So, you have to, there's a trade-off balance here. So, that's just another part of the argument or the discussion, I guess I should say, that we haven't really had.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and that is in the outreach publication that we're working on. We do have a whole section on that, but yeah, so I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that part, maybe some of the trade-offs, or because I think it is a good point to bring up. Anybody have any comments on that?
The Park Service, for instance, did not want down to 1% on the beaches because the activity that would have required on that beach was so intrusive in order to get it to that cleanup endpoint that they would have damaged the beach, damaged the resources, and had impacts to the resources that were beyond what they were willing to accept. So there's always this balance. We know that we can't go out and remove 100% of the oil from the environment. You know, we've been doing oil spill science for 40 years now. We know that this is true. The question is, you know, what is the consequence, you know, of the oil that's left? And that's what the science hopefully continues to inform us as to, you know, what that consequence is.
Good point. Comments on that? Yep, Markus?
A quick comment on the fingerprinting. Initially, when it all started, we had an issue getting information on the oil and source oil. So what can be done? I mean, the first thing that oil companies do when they successfully have tapped a well, that they do a very thorough analysis of the oil. And they have top-notch machinery for that. And these data then vanish in some computer and some file cabinets, but they are not on the public record. So what would be very helpful for future events, that this information would be available for researchers so that you can go right away to the core of the issue. So if there would be some oil available and the basic data that you need to identify it, then you can accelerate, of course, a lot of processes that are also beneficial for solving a lot of problems.
Yeah, good point.
Has anyone correlated the impact of the oil spill and the dead zone? I've read that the dead zone in the Gulf is quite large this year.
So the question is, has anyone been correlating the dead zone that you hear about off the coast in the Gulf of Mexico with the oil spill? And there are a lot of folks looking at. There have been a lot of folks looking at that dead zone for a long period of time. The issue again goes to the complexity of the system. It's that you have so many confounding factors that are coming in to tease this apart. I think somebody today, this morning speaker talked about, the computational power, right, to run some of these models, for long periods of time. It's similar in that you've got to take this system and try to look at all possible factors coming in, whether they're, biological, environmental, chemical, physical, atmospheric, and then try to tease all this apart. Now, I think, so the answer is yes, people are looking at it, but to correlate it, that's going to be a very, very, very long time if you can ever get your hands around that. And I think that one of the things maybe that has come out, and that is a positive aspect maybe from a research standpoint is, you see everybody now collaborating in a way that looks at the Northern Gulf in a much more collaborative, comprehensive way that values the resources that the Gulf of Mexico brings to the area. People appreciate the need for it economically, what it brings, the input, everything from an ecosystem services standpoint. So keeping the collaborations going and making sure, and going to Markus's point, that the lines of communication stay open, and that the data sharing is there, so that if you can at some point begin to change policy, that may have a better standing. Particularly, folks will collaborate together. Scientists, for us, we always fuss about funding, but ultimately we want to provide some way to get the information out that it becomes more practical in use. And I think maybe my question would be back to the group is, what do we need to do for the resource management? What do we need to be giving folks and doing? Because we want to take, I can't speak for everybody, but I want my stuff to go out of the lab and be used. So anything that we can be doing, I think getting those lines back to us as well. But Markus's point is well taken. It's very difficult when you deal with industry to ask for this stuff and get this information. It's needed, but that otherwise, we're just doing what we're doing in the lab, but we've got to get it out to the actual users that need it.
So let's build on that, because that's a perfect segue for what we were trying to get out of this session. So after seeing the presentations today and hearing the discussion, is there information that you guys saw today that you could use in your own work? Are there additional questions that kind of popped into your brain when you saw these presentations? Anyone have any comments on that? Yep.
Well, I was kind of going back to what Dr. Clement has said about doing a pre-assessment before the oil came here. And it sounded like a lot of people were surprised about how the SRBs looked when they reached shore, and we didn't know that ahead of time. But having that baseline data, because this is our new baseline, there's no doubt about it, this is our new baseline, but starting to collect that over time so we have that information to know what is it really affecting.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we're doing contaminant studies on sea turtle nests, but like,
Yeah.
before that, what if they were already contaminated? What if there were other contaminants out there that we didn't consider ahead of time?
Yeah, that's a great point. And if you think about the amount of money that's going to flow to the 5 affected states, right? And really, you can say 5 minus 2, kind of, 1.5, but you know what I mean. And yet, I wonder how much of that's going to be committed to doing that kind of long-term monitoring that needs to be done in order to create this background baseline that we all agree is crucial, okay? If we could, somehow if we could control that, I mean, in my mind, that's one of the critical things that needs to be done. The problem is we're not reacting to an emergency. You know, we're talking about spending considerable amount of money and planning a very detailed long-term study, the results of which, I mean, to us as scientists will be very useful, but to the general public may not be useful at all. But it would be definitely useful if this happened again. So.
Well, it's very important to make very clear that the main bottleneck for a lot of research related to the Deepwater Horizon spill was the missing baseline data. You cannot say that something changes if you don't know what happened before.
That's right.
And so without those data, we are really arm-waving and guessing.
And the interesting point I may add is sometimes people question me that when I talk about, I mean, of course, I did pre-oil spills. I just happened to do one, actually. And at that time, I didn't even know that I'm actually doing a pre-oil spill survey. I just walked the beaches looking for tar balls and documented it. And SCAT, of course, did one, and they documented it. But I really believe we can get, at least for Alabama and Florida sandy beaches, that information can be assembled if there is a will even now. I'll tell you why. The reason I'm claiming this is, I mean, these are all published peer-reviewed publications where we set this hypothesis. So anybody is welcome to openly debate me on a scientific platform and challenge my science, right? My basic hypothesis, when DWH tar balls and SRBs formed, they're incredibly unique from a physical characteristics. I already emphasized in my presentation, right? And there is no way a leaking, of course there are a lot of, Pat talked, showed some pictures of these seeps and stuff, right? There is no way you're getting a DWH looking tar ball from a seep. It's just not possible. Physically, it's not possible. Because you need to have so much amount of floating emulsified oil coming during a time of recession where there is a sufficient interaction with the sand and it has to sink and roll and all that stuff. It didn't happen. It's just not possible. Okay. So what we can do is, if you want pre-oil spill, it's very simple. If we can do a very detailed survey, collect all possible tar balls, and go through a physical matching as well as a chemical matching using multiple lines. I mean, metals, of course, you can do hopanes, steranes, diamondites, and there is a whole suite of things we can look at it. We can actually even get the BP oil spill baseline if you want to, if there is a will. But more importantly, I think we all would agree that the background has changed. Mm-hmm. And having an understanding of what is the new background, it's to me, it's taxpayers' interest. It's your interest as a taxpayer, basically, to support something like that. I mean, and it's not even academic research. I think ADM should be allowed to do it. What is the equivalent in Florida? It's
DEP.
DEP should be doing that. I think we should encourage agencies like that and empower them so they have some sort of a database. And we should, in fact, as a taxpayer, you should demand ADM and DEP that, hey, where is the state baseline information? And I personally would like to see some sort of an organized information managed at the ADM website or a DEP website or state agency website, which is authoritative. So if something happens in the future, we know what is the baseline in terms of oil contamination, and we can have a better management strategies.
I'd like to add one thing to that, and I agree completely about the baseline, but one thing about, I'd be careful about, saying that SRBs only happen Deepwater Horizon, and that if you find something that looks like this anywhere, that it has to be from Deepwater Horizon, because, and Scott's worked a lot oil spills more than I have, but the mechanism of formation, the scale of Deepwater Horizon focused a lot of attention on these things, but this mechanism can happen in other spills. It just depends on the characteristics of the oil when it comes ashore. So, a lot of what happened with Deepwater Horizon, in a lot of cases, the scale focused a lot of attention and brought things to light. But like the process, and the formation of SRBs that can happen in other spills. That's not.
It has happened.
It has
and
happened.
will happen.
Yeah, well,
It's
but what's
not-
unique?
Yeah,
It's different.
My
But
question
you're
is,
right.
in Florida,
Florida,
Alabama beaches,
Right now.
I am yet to see.
Right now.
yeah.
But I mean, a future spill
Oh,
can happen in
absolutely.
one of these. So that-
Absolutely can happen,
It
yeah.
doesn't detract from
Yeah.
in Alabama and Florida, just to make sure that people don't take away from it that, this could never happen. This was unique to Deepwater Horizon. It's something that can happen with other spills.
Has
Has
happened
happened.
and will happen.
Yeah, in fact, I'm actually curious. I would love to have a tar ball with very similar physical characteristics, completely different chemical characteristics. I'm yet to find one. I mean, at least, my
In
research is
Alabama.
restricted to Alabama and Florida.
And especially your
You probably had to go to Texas,
Yeah,
is it?
Texas.
Well, I sampled in
Louisiana.
Houston after the White Point, Texas White Point, yeah.
That's a bunker fuel.
Yeah, that's the bunker fuel, yeah, it's very easy.
You
Yeah.
gotta have another light crude.
That's
oil
right,
that's gone through
light
the
crude spill, yeah,
emulsification
yeah.
process, and then strand it.
Yeah.
And have a more medium sand environment.
And it should be emulsified, It should stay offshore for a while and sufficiently emulsified. So it's a very unique condition, actually, so.
And just one point for the record,
All right, you go ahead.
similar to your background surveys in Alabama, Escambia County did some background surveys pre-oiling, just before the oil came ashore as well, and that data should be.
study.
Is it, okay,
publicly
is it
available.
published somewhere? Is it documented in some report?
Yeah, it's
Oh, love
yeah,
to get,
we can
okay.
issue copies.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do a survey. Of course, we monitor the beach daily, which Auburn and know that I've been on the beach daily. So I know what we had. That's why we agreed with the SCAT post-box pre-spill survey, because those were basically what we saw. I think Orange Beach had 0, Gulf Shores had 1 tarball kilometer, I think, average 0.4 centimeters. Dolphin Island was a little bit skewed because they found most of them at the wastewater treatment plant, but I'll let that one segment go.
You sure those were tar balls?
I wasn't gonna follow on that, but as an aggregate, that was reasonable.
Yeah, and I think at least at the time the Escambia surveys were done, which would have been May
The closest we
2010,
had.
there was no oil was detected at
And
that
that-
point.
Oh, is this caviar too? Okay.
That matches up to a study done whenever the Mexico spill, they didn't come in Alabama, but they did come all the way up to Perdido Key, which I don't think they found any on Perdido Key.
Oh, I have the paper, yeah, 82, right? After you start.
Found a little,
Yeah.
little ictoc at the pass.
Okay,
Later
so
on.
Can
I
I,
recorded baseline data.
okay, well, I want to
That's
add
where-
one thing to that.
Okay, and then we
Sorry.
gotta move on, because we have
Okay.
4 minutes and we need
Okay.
to get some more discussion
Okay, but the
going.
only thing I would add is that we're not just talking about tar balls when
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about baseline, long-term monitoring. We're talking about ecological monitoring, we're talking about organisms, other conditions, right? And the important thing is the long-term part of it, because we've perturbated this system and now it's re-equilibrating, okay? So we need to carry that data set out long enough to where we can say with some certainty that we have achieved a baseline, whatever that is. And that goes for all of these various things that are not just oil-related, so.
Yeah, no, and that's great, and baseline data is something that I think we've heard almost in every discussion we've had, so it's a very important topic. Thank you for bringing that up. Susan had her hand up, and then we'll go back there.
Okay, just real quick, when you've done your research on our beach-based area, or whatever you call it, I'm not a scientist, so forgive me for butchering that.